So All Spare episode 1 opens with Kim Kardashian's character, Alora Grant, and Naomi Watts' character, Liberton Ronson, discussing how they feel essentially discriminated against because of the fact that they are female attorneys practicing divorce law in this law firm. I will say, as a female attorney myself, sometimes that does happen where you feel as though at times you're not being taken seriously in the profession. So I could definitely relate to this opening sequence, and I actually think that a lot of female attorneys probably have a story or two where they could relate to this opening sequence. Them having this conversation when they're interrupted by Glenn Close's character, Miss Dina Standish, who states that, hey, she's been the only female lawyer at this firm for several years, and it's time to change things. She encourages the ladies to start their own law firm. Can I just say I love all of the outfits in the opening sequence. They're gorgeous, very work appropriate and court appropriate. Kim is wearing this sort of nude beige double-breasted blazer with these amazing shoulder pads. Hair is just completely laid. Naomi Watts looks gorgeous as well. She's wearing this light blue suit with this white button-down shirt. Glenn Close is wearing this black, pinstripe suit. They all look fabulous. We meet Niecy Nash's character, Emerald Green. These names are a little crazy, but anyhow, we meet Emerald Green and they invite Emerald to join them in their new firm, but they decide not to recruit Sarah Paulson's character. Her name is Carrington Lane, even though, Carrington bills the most, and Carrington is very upset about this, so much so that she starts to destroy Glenn Close's character's property, which is interesting to see, as an attorney, because they're all attorneys and they would be aware, having had to do the bar exam, that destroying property is a criminal offense that could affect her bar license. But anyhow, Sarah Paulson's character decides to start her own law firm as well. We fast forward 10 years later. We see Kim driving this amazing Bentley. She pulls up to this incredible mansion, dressed to the nines. She's dressed for this anniversary dinner. Meet her husband, who is this NFL star. Later on, the lawyers all sit down and they have a conversation about their favorite cases over the past 10 years. Now, they always say in writing, show, don't tell. Here, there's a lot of telling the audience things that have happened rather than showing us. I think that the plot could have benefited from showing instead of all this telling. So, for example, Naomi Watts' character describes a case involving a divorce where the client has a very violent husband who's threatening to harm her in a very extreme way. Again, a lot of telling. Why not show us? Show us the dissolution of this marriage. Show us a hearing in court regarding this case, even exploring the domestic violence aspect and how a lot of times domestic violence can be tied in some way to a divorce proceeding. For example, in a domestic violence situation, in a marriage, you can get a protective order, against the abusive spouse. That would have been interesting to see. But in any case, they begin going over one of their new cases. Kim's character, Alora, asked Tiana Taylor's character if she wants to study for the bar. I thought that was a very cute little detail. A huge part of becoming an attorney is studying for and passing the bar exam. It's an extremely grueling process that requires hours and hours of studies for months. So it was a nice detail to add. In the next scene, they go over one of their new cases. This woman is married to this huge tech billionaire whom she's divorcing. She says he has these sexual proclivities and feels like she can't satisfy him. One night, the wife and her husband are having a threesome that the husband, of course, requests, and the wife falls in love with the other woman. So because she has fallen in love with someone outside of the marriage, this other woman, she is lowballing her divorce settlement to the attorneys at the firm, and the attorneys encourage her not to lowball her settlement because she has sacrificed her life to make this tech billionaire's dreams come true. Interesting scene. The rules of divorce law or family law is very dependent on the state that you live in. This show takes place in California, which is a community property jurisdiction. Marital property is all property acquired during the marriage by any means other than gift, descent, or devise. In a community property state, the marital property must be divided equally between the parties. This scene, it alludes to the factors that a court will determine in awarding spousal support when a marriage is coming to an end. Courts, especially in California, they want to maintain the status quo of the marriage. That is, they want to maintain the standard of living that was established during the marriage, taking into consideration several factors, one of them being the extent to which the supported party contributed to the attainment of education, training, career position, or a license by the supporting party. And they touch on that in the show. They allude to the fact that this wife sacrificed everything for this now huge tech billionaire, and so a court would take that factor into account when awarding spousal support, along with many other factors. However, and interesting to note, there is a prenup in place in this scenario for this particular client. Prenups can limit or even waive spousal support. However, there are certain factors you have to meet. Key requirements include both parties having independent legal representation before signing the prenup, full financial disclosure, and the agreement being conscionable when signed. Now, a court can override a spousal support waiver, in a prenup if enforcing it would lead to severe hardship for one spouse. Also, a court will not enforce a provision that is deemed unfair or unconscionable at the time of enforcement, even if it was fair at the time of signing. Because there is a prenup in place, what the divorce attorney in the show, what they could have done is to seek to invalidate the prenup on the basis that it was unconscionable to the wife at the time of signing and even at the time of enforcement. The show makes it very clear that she had to give up all of her dreams, her friends, her family. She was a kept wife who presumably was not allowed to work by her husband. Therefore, if she was forced during the course of the marriage to give up all of her dreams and was not able to get a career or an education or anything to support herself, there is an argument that enforcing an ironclad prenup would be unconscionable because it would create immense hardship on the wife, who may not be able to support herself after years of pressure and isolation from her tech billionaire husband. In the show, they make it very clear that the wife was isolated, so much so that Nash's character even says to the wife, he Rapunzel'd your ass, locked you away in a tower, isolated you from other people. Nash's character also encourages the wife, to think of a number that reflects her lifetime of service to this tech billionaire and his dreams. So again, this ties into what we talked about earlier, the factors that a court will consider in awarding spousal support. I really liked this scene. There was a line where the attorneys tell her, anytime you think about a memory that you have of a sacrifice that you made to this husband of yours, add a 0. I thought that it was actually kind of heartwarming and, funny. The character of this wife in the show is obviously a bit beat down emotionally, and it was a nice moment seeing, the attorneys Kim Kardashian's character, Naomi Watts, all of the women in general just reassure her and remind her that, hey, you contributed also to this marriage, and that contribution does mean something. It does have value, and you should ask for a figure that reflects that value. I do think that this prenup could have been challenged in court on the grounds that it was unconscionable. However, the lawyers in the show, they don't exactly take this approach. They take a very unconventional and, honestly, arguably unlawful approach to get the husband to agree to a better settlement for the wife, their client, and we're going to get into that later on. In California also, a prenup cannot promote divorce. An example of this would be awarding a spouse a large sum of money simply for getting divorced. And these agreements are said to violate California public policy, which aims to promote and uphold marriage. And so you can't have provisions in a prenup that promote divorce as well. Fun fact. Anyway, fast forwarding through the episode, later on, Kim Kardashian's character and Watts' characters meet with the tech billionaire's dominatrix mistress. And they offer her a part of the wife's expected settlement. The attorneys go into a sort of settlement conversation, meeting with the tech billionaire and his lawyers and the husband's lawyers. They essentially laugh at the divorce settlement agreement. They refuse to sign it. Kim Kardashian and her entire team is requesting $210 million in the divorce settlement. The husband's attorneys bring up the fact that the wife signed a prenup. So Kim Kardashian's character alludes to my earlier point in this video, which was about, hey, this contract is potentially not enforceable because it's unconscionable. The wife at the time, we find out she was 22 years old when she signed it. There was an army of lawyers. Maybe there was not independent legal representation for the wife. And this army of lawyers, Kim makes the statement that they coerced the wife into signing this very lopsided prenup. So it does allude to these things, the effect of unconscionability. However, rather than challenging the contract in court, they take another approach. They bring the dirt from the dominatrix and threaten to expose the husband to the public if the husband does not sign the divorce settlement agreement for $210 million. So this scene is very amusing, hilarious, it's entertaining. However, I would argue that it is completely unlawful and the husband's attorneys could actually object to it as such. I actually agree with the husband's attorneys. They did object at one point. The husband did sign the contract. However, he could later on argue that he was under duress when signing this contract, and that, the contract is therefore invalid. Duress is unlawful pressure exerted upon a person to coerce them to perform an act that he or she ordinarily would not perform. Traditionally, duress was more physical in nature, or examples of duress. For example, pointing a gun at someone and telling them, yo, sign this contract or I'm going to shoot you. That is an example of physical duress. However, it can manifest in other ways as well. One way is where the person's threatened to publicly disclose damaging information about another person unless they sign the contract. So that is exactly what happened in this scene. Kim Kardashian's character, Watts and Nash, they told the husband, sign this contract or we'll release this extremely humiliating, damaging information about you to the public. If you think about it, that is duress. So although the husband signed the contract, if I were his attorney, I would later challenge the validity of the contract, stating that the husband was under duress when he signed it. You could also argue, and the husband's attorneys do bring this up in the scene, that it is unethical for the attorneys to do something like this. And they, you could probably have reported to the ethics committee for violating the rules of ethics in their jurisdiction. So I want to talk really briefly about the outfit Kim wore in this settlement negotiation scene that went viral online. She wore this navy blue pinstripe Jean-Paul Gaultier skirt suit that plunged into a thong. The outfit went completely viral online. Although the suit itself is very nice, probably don't need to say the obvious that you could not wear something like this to court. Judges actually can be pretty strict about court attire, and I do believe if you try to argue in front of a judge in this outfit, you would not be allowed to. The court probably would even ask you to leave. I have been in virtual court appearances where, they literally tell you, if you're not attired appropriately, we may refuse to hear your case. So you just, could not go to court in an outfit like this. However, this scene, to distinguish it, did take place in a private settlement meeting at their law office, not court. Fast forwarding through the episode, later on, Kim Kardashian and the husband, they have this intense fight where the husband talks about how he feels overshadowed by Kim Kardashian's character's success, even though he himself is a successful NFL player. Again, I thought this was a good scene to show the dynamic that comes up in relationships sometimes where, a man is somehow threatened by the success of his woman. I thought the scene did a good job of showing the dynamic of how, hey, it's not your fault as a woman for being ambitious and successful and for wanting more for yourself. It's the other person's fault, for not working through the insecurities that they have and that have nothing to do with you. Kim Kardashian's acting here is a bit wooden. She doesn't emote very well. Kind of speaks in this clipped, monotonous voice when she's acting in episode 1. Does not really emote at all through her expressions. The male actor playing her husband is emoting way more than she is in this scene, even though it's supposed to be this heartbreaking scene. But anyway, he wants a divorce because he feels threatened by, Allure Grant's success. And Grant's friends show up and they comfort her. Another heartwarming scene. It was honestly nice to see in, a TV show, women coming together and comforting each other through a difficult time. It was nice to see them sit in Allure Grant's, Kim Kardashian's living room and talk about relationships and the pitfalls. And I feel like this scene was pretty close to what happens in real life with your girlfriends, where they'll come over and talk about relationships and the upsides and downsides. So I thought this was a nice little scene. Later on, fast forwarding through the episode, we get to the great shock of the episode, which is that Kim Kardashian's husband in the show is hooking up with Teyana Taylor's character. Very hot scene. Hot scene. Taylor comes in giving all kinds of body. The two just attack each other, making out, kissing, hot scene. And that concludes episode 1. All in all, I didn't think the first episode was that bad. There's a lot of public scrutiny, but I didn't think it was that bad. Was it a perfect episode? No, but it did touch on some interesting themes and dynamics that you don't see often in TV shows. Some of the decisions of the lawyers were definitely at times not very lawyer-like, but it could be just to create a dramatic effect. But what did you think about All's Fair? Comment below, and if you like this video, subscribe.